Hey, I'm Roger with Kinsta, the community manager here. I'm joined today by Tammie Lister, a WordPress core contributor for many, many years. And today we're just going to have a fun conversation about Tammie's experience of participating with WordPress and advice for people who are either participating now or are looking to participate. So, hey, Tammie, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am doing very well. You've been around WordPress for many years. A lot of people know who you are. But for those that maybe are new to the community, could you just give us a little bit of background of, what brought you into WordPress and what do you
Yeah.
do outside of WordPress?
Yeah, so I started in WordPress because I was kind of torturing some code, as most people were back in the day. I did that thing that everyone did, which is have your own CMS. Which was I had my own incredibly insecure CMS, and I was doing like the kind of thing of changing my design all the time. I was blogging, I was writing, but I was changing my design all the time. And I was just trying to find my way with this newish thing called the web, and I loved the theme. And someone was just like, "There's this newish thing called WordPress, but it allows you to change very easily." It was right when themes were just starting to become a thing. And I didn't know that themes would be this perfect blend of, I've always had like a kind of hybrid background, but was always told you could either do art or you could do development. You could not do both of the things together. So throughout my kind of life, I've had to pick or choose either one. And I found within WordPress pretty rapidly, I didn't have to choose either one. I could kind of blend both of them together. And that was really perfect for me. I pretty rapidly found that I could create quite fast things. So I started working for myself. I started creating, niche down quite early on into communities. That was kind of always something that I was in. I had a bit of a background in that. And I actually kind of came in through core, but went rather rapidly because it was very noisy, very scary, super loud, and seemed quite shouty, to be honest, and went to BuddyPress. That was one of the spaces that I ended up in. For those that don't know, BuddyPress is like a suite of awesome things that come together to make community. And I was there for a while, and I worked really happily doing that. And then I slowly found my way back through themes and core. So my route was kind of an interesting way, and I haven't really looked back, but I was one of those people that for a long time was pretty quiet in the community, just working on tickets. And I remember my first word count where someone kind of mentioned my contributions and all those kind of things, and we can kind of dig into that. But for me, I remember the things that now I look and see others, and I've always tried to do for others, and they kind of happened to me. So, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So, did you go to school for development and programming, or are you just
So
self-taught?
I'm not young. So back in my day, the web didn't exist.
Yeah.
I just turned 49, so it literally was you choose one or the other.
Yeah.
So my background is very firmly in the arts background,
Okay.
and it's because that was the choice I made. Well, I made psychology and then I went to art. But unfortunately, not very many artists when they leave are able to make it in art, and not eating is not great. So it was really, really difficult to make it as an artist. I retrained in software, and I remember one of my kind of like projects at the end of the year was this new language called PHP.
Ah,
So that really
new.
dates me. But it was things like all the kind of, I was thinking I wanted to go into gaming. I was thinking I wanted to do all that kind of stuff rather
Yeah.
than I thought that I would end up in the web. But there was the opportunity to work on web projects. I was always really curious. I was still using open source software mainly because I couldn't really afford software. I couldn't really afford a lot of those options. So for me, things like SUSE Linux seemed natural because of my geographical location as well. It just worked. I was building my own machines just because I couldn't afford to have any other machines. I also love tinkering. You probably don't want to have one of my machines that I was building back in the day, and how I didn't electrocute myself, I don't know. But my art
It's low
background,
voltage.
I was not doing that thing, you know, when you build machine in school and you're taught to like put that thing around your wrist and ground yourself. I was not doing any of that stuff.
Wild.
The things now, I would just, I would totally camera myself now about that.
Absolutely.
But I was just enjoying and embracing. There was so much new technology. It almost seemed every week there was something new to kind of play with, and it was the world of like animated rotating GIFs and things. But there was so many confines on what you could do, like in like the links browser and the confines. When you suddenly could do something that wasn't in the confines, it was really, really exciting, and it was like a new art form. And my art form had been photography or painting, so it was quite technical, my art forms anyway, so it was quite natural. And I've been playing with computers, but they were a little bit different since I was little, so I've always liked it. But again, you were kind of taught for a long time you couldn't be both, so yeah.
Absolutely. So we're looking like late 90s, early 2000s, you start looking at the web because food is important for you.
Yeah.
Did you discover WordPress right as it came out, or was it a little bit
No,
later?
it was a little bit after, but I discovered it through communities that I was in food blogging. But I was already working with some startups, and I was already doing some work. You got to bear in mind, I was quite well timed for things like the bubble as well. So I got to leave and kind of enjoy that, which was also really bizarre. But I got my first trip to America as a result of that and things like that. So
excellent.
It was a good time to be a hybrid as well, because a lot of startups really wanted to hire hybrids, but they weren't particularly thinking of this type of technology. For me, then I got to do my own kind of agency stuff. You could charge, like, nobody knew what to charge either then as well. So that was kind of really interesting. But I was also working remote, which was a really interesting part. I know like remote is kind of a keyword or whatever now for me, but for me, I have had non-remote jobs, but for me, it gave me the capacity to really just start kind of working for myself and kind of taking that dive. You know, I did the traditional thing of I was doing a lot part-time, was doing the more traditional stuff, thinking I had to do that in conjunction with it, and then slowly it took over that I had enough of my own clients and I could just do the leap. And when I did the leap, I did 100% because I knew this thing called WordPress, and I was starting to really discover this thing called BuddyPress, and I was starting to do it. I 100% took the leap into doing as much as I could possibly.
Very cool.
So that was kind of really awesome for me. Yeah.
So after you started working with WordPress, do you happen to remember what version or it was when you got introduced?
Not the best at brains memories.
No, fair enough. Me either. But I guess the question is, after you started using the software, how long did it take until you got involved with the open source project?
So the thing is, I was pretty much from day one involved, but I wasn't necessarily publicly involved. And I think that's the difference. I know I can be quite vocal now, but my natural disposition is not. And my natural disposition is to be just a quiet little doer. I can communicate 100%, and I know we talk about introverts and extroverts. A lot of introverts are totally fine communicating, but we would prefer not to.
But it's exhausting.
In the most open heart way. And that's where I fall into. I would much rather that my work communicates for me. But if you get to know me and it's like my topic, I will talk until like anything. So that was the thing. And that's always been the way that I've kind of felt with open source software as well. You know, if there's something wrong, I will report a bug. So I was pretty used. I'd kind of come up through open source through Linux communities, and I'd done IRC in Linux, so I was very used to bug reporting and all of those kind of things. So that was something I naturally did. I had slightly run away from some of the core chats because they were quite strong in those days, but that was just because they were just a lot for me. And group chats still to this day I can find quite overwhelming. Like on some of the chats, we can get into like how organized the community is now, and it is amazing. But for different people find their different paces. For me, to this day, I love like GitHub issues and tracking systems. where you can consider and pause and think of your replies and kind of get information out. So that was where I started replying, and where I could like log. I could find a bug, I could take it there, I could log it. It's pretty much most people's contribution journey. Their first bug, and their first bug. And then for me, the first kind of theme point, and themes are kind of always going to be a point for me, was Kubrick. Okay. And I remember looking at that, and I remember looking at the code, and that's so many people's first theme point as well. Like, it's timeless for people. I remember being like, this has so much options, so many potentials. It was really cutting edge at the time. I know we look at it now and we'd be like, in some places, but at the time it was just really amazing.
Sure.
And been able to like learn from that. And I had so many different WordPress themes. Like every other day I would make one. I had that like theme switcher. I was doing CSS reboots. I just with so many different styling that I would do.
Excellent. So you went from build your own CMS to really just, hey, I can do themes and I can have a ton of fun here.
I went all in on themes, and then that became my path for quite a long time. Yeah.
Do you think that some of that is due to your artistic background, and with the themes, you're able to kind of bring some of that expression about?
Yeah. I think it is. For me, themes really embrace the hybridness, but also it's also my kind of experimenting. CSS was really at the edge at the time, or starting to like, it's still pretty funky stuff you can do. We always forget that about CSS. So it was really exciting. It was a really exciting format, and the boundaries that we could do. It was just the ability of Canvas. And honestly, like going from not being able to create anything visually to within. And it actually was, if we look at the timeline, it's a matter of years, we could suddenly like be able to put stuff in. Like the pace of the web is actually quite slow now compared to what it was. There was like a time when it just went woof, like what we could do from like a dark links page to like woof. It was amazing. And then I just been able to package it all up and take it to another site. And then I never got really, I worked for other people. I didn't get into the packaging it up myself. But that kind of idea of packaging it up and having a site that you could put on someone else's site, it's really powerful.
Absolutely. No, I remember like when themes became a really big deal. It was just, I wasn't really building my own theme, but I was trying different themes out like all the time. Yeah. And I remember some of my friends kind of, being annoyed. They're like, dude, why do you keep changing the look of your site? And I'm like, because I'm having fun. It's all right. Relax.
It was like every other time. It got so bad for me that most of my main sites would have theme switches.
Okay.
That was so bad. I couldn't decide which one I wanted. It had theme switches. Like,
nice. So
and
you're
there was
building your own Zen garden.
Yeah, and there was also this thing of like night and day before we knew about light and dark and dark mode and time mode, right? And then there was this thing of like time zone visiting, and it would change depending on the time zone visiting, and then you'd have the header change. There was this like fad for a while where the header, a sun would change, or like if it was a farm picture, different animals would go into the barn or something. Like we were doing like weird stuff with like jQuery just to like show that the site was like interacting to the visitor. I kind of miss that because we don't really do stuff like that now, and it was a kind of user experience, but we didn't know it was UX then either, because we also weren't using the term UX.
Sure.
But for me, it was the start of product design, and that's where I've kind of over the years found myself getting into, because we weren't really thinking about like the back experience. It was just like a form. It was forms. That was all it was. And then we started thinking about how do the forms connect from a core perspective. But at the front, we were really thinking about that experience. We were thinking about like, what does this mean? How do you interact with it? So yeah, that was really fun for me.
Excellent. Before we dive too far into the back end of WordPress and the changes that have occurred.
Yeah.
So you got involved with WordPress, you got involved with the project. When did you start going to WordCamps?
Quite a way in. Living in England, there probably were more camps than I thought there were. I didn't know, or I didn't live in the areas, or And the first one I went to, I think it was quite a few years into it. And it was through BuddyPress again. It just happened to be that some people I knew from BuddyPress were going. So
Okay.
then I kind of started going more. But again, bear in mind, I was still self-sponsoring. So I think that that's
Sure.
also a thing. Like when you're self-sponsoring, it's seen, but I didn't have a company. So it was seeing my own need. It was a different time when maybe companies weren't sponsoring so much. It was kind of an early stage. Yeah, for me. But I remember going, and then I would put names. Suddenly, like someone would know me from a ticket. That was strange, or someone would. But it was an incredible experience for me, but also very strange as someone who's a complete introvert.
Sure.
But then I started slowly speaking again. That was a super weird experience for me. I had to learn to speak. I knew how to do things like performance poetry I'd done before, but that's very different because you're doing an act.
Yeah.
Speaking on stage is incredibly different, and speaking
Yeah.
about technical stuff to multilingual countries and different things, incredibly different. So
Sure.
that took a lot of lessons and time over. But yeah, it was really interesting. But I'm very lucky that WordPress has got me to see so many different countries now over the years.
No, absolutely. When you were moving into public speaking, do you remember if there was any moment, any specific talk you gave, or any process you found to help you get better at public speaking? Did you discover anything in that journey?
So I try not to forget how bad I was on the first time, and I was so bad the first time. Well, it wasn't the really first time, but the first within WordPress that I did it, I actually forgot. I spoke so fast that I forgot to do the questions at the end. I went to sit down because my brain was so. I don't even remember it because I'm also like not a super memory person.
Yeah.
And also like the brain forgets bad experiences.
Sure.
Mine does, which is good.
Sure.
But it's definitely one of those ones. But I try not to forget it because I think it's really important, because then it teaches me to speak slower. My natural instinct is like when I'm nervous to speak, when I'm excited to speak and be incredibly animated. The best things that I've learned over time is just to breathe, and also to prepare enough, but not to prepare so much that I'm panicking myself about it. To speak when I'm the right person to speak about it, not to feel that I should speak at everything. There was a time that I kind of was just speaking quite a lot, and I think you get in a time when you're probably quite tired and you can burn out with speaking as well. So all of those kind of things. Drawing my own slides really helps me because it gets me to know my talk as well. So yeah, there's something about that. Like it's just finding your voice is really, really important, and you don't have to be like everybody else. You can find out how you do. Speaking outside of WordPress actually helped me speaking in WordPress as well. Been able to speak about this project outside, and say like I've been to some kind of design conferences in different places and saying like, how does design work in open source? And that reflection and speaking in different spaces has given me some
Excellent. So it sounds like your advice to people who want to start public speaking is just do it, and and it'll come.
And also my advice would be, not everyone has to speak. And I think that that's the interesting thing. Sometimes we're like, everyone has to speak, everyone has to get up on stage and do speaking. But sometimes what you could do rather than speaking, if you find it difficult, is you could create an incredible demo, and you could put that, or you could do a podcast. So you don't have to do live speaking, is kind of where I'm going. You could do a podcast, you could do a video, you could do a Twitch stream, you could do all these kind of different things. You don't always have to do live talks. Twitch is something I've been experimenting with, and I think that we sometimes forget and think that, I have to be on stage, or if my talk doesn't get accepted, that's super key, but you could do it on Twitch. And you could share that knowledge, and you could also start practicing it that way.
Excellent. Great advice. And, I do know you've got a Do the Woo show that you're host on quite often. Yeah. How's that experience been? How have you found being the interviewer?
Yeah, I love it. And that's one thing that I want to do more. It reminds me a little bit of going from being a kind of a contributor that does all the time to moving into a mentorship almost a little bit more. The stories and the incredible things that I've kind of found out about people, that like, that someone's like, you can think someone's going to be a really good guest and you're like, yeah, this person's going to be amazing, and then you just start saying a sentence or something and then they just run with it. You're like, oh. And you find out such good, interesting things about people. So yeah, I want to do more things like that in the future, just because it's something I never thought that I would want to necessarily do. I also have Jonathan, who's an amazing co-host, so I'm really excited about that. That's been awesome. But yeah, it's been something. Finding out stories of people has been really, it's those conversations you have in hallways with people where they say, oh, well, I studied this. Oh, well, this is more about me. I actually get to have that on the podcast now and find out these like full stories and full experiences with people, which is really nice.
Awesome. So circling back a little bit to BuddyPress, a lot of people are not aware of BuddyPress, and there's a resurgence going on right now where they're really kickstarting it again, because I think we're realizing like forums are still very relevant, and getting people out of social media is like, we need to get out of these walled gardens and back to what the web, really was in the late 90s, early 2000s. What was your initial draw to the BuddyPress project?
Themes, kind of, I came in via there.
Yeah.
I think it was quite a few, if I remember rightly, it was cleaning up CSS, but that's actually been an entryway into a lot of projects, and that was one of my entryways or areas of WordPress, have been cleaning up CSS files. That's actually a really good tip if everyone wants entryways, CSS patches, because you also get to know the structure of a project that way. And then the people. And that's something that I think is really, really important. Is when people give you space to contribute and give you space to just be you in a contribution space. And I got that within BuddyPress. That was me at the time. And I think that's the thing within WordPress that maybe is a good point to note. We're all going to change. Like, I'm a different person to when I entered WordPress to when I was midway through my WordPress journey, because we all change and we all adapt, right? But BuddyPress really fitted me for that part of my journey, and it was just perfectly timed for me to do those contributions. So yeah, that really, I was very lucky. I got to write a book on theming to do with it. I got to really just immerse myself, and I was very lucky. I got to do specific outside projects on it, and that proves if you focus on an area, and I didn't do it for that, but it's one thing that I think happens as a byproduct of you focusing on an area, that you will get work. It's one of those things, because you're honing those skills and you're really learning about that area. I'm so happy that it's getting a discovery. I think sometimes people look at BuddyPress and are like, ooh, it's a lot. But that's the point. You don't have to use it all. You can use different pieces. One of the best things for me isn't necessarily the forums, it's the activity stream. And I think activity streams and streams where you can have everything that you're doing at the moment are really, really important. And how do you own your stream or your social footprint or your social arc is incredibly powerful. So yeah, that's like something that BuddyPress does as well. That, you remember back in the day, that live stream blogs, the timeline, there was that thing that was like where I kind of like was obsessing about for a long time, like how could the BuddyPress stream be that kind of stuff. Okay,
very cool. So if somebody's looking at getting involved with the project, and let's say they're a developer, let's talk about developers for a little bit, and maybe they're feeling a little bit, the core team might be intimidating or whatever. I'm sure they're all lovely people, but you're just new to something, and when you're new, things are scary. Where, if somebody feels intimidated and they can't necessarily make it to a camp and like meet people in person, what's some tips and advice you can give someone to kind of navigate the WordPress site, and then also the Slack workspace, which is also quite busy?
So there's a couple of different options now that were not back when I was doing it, which is amazing. One, there are actually contributions today that happen async, as in sync, that you can join in. So that's good, but it may not help. Two, there are calls for action on. So one, subscribe to the core blog. So on make/core. Subscribe so that you can get updates, and there'll be calls for participation. So there'll be calls for participation releases. You do not have to lead something to learn about something, so you can just start being aware of releases and being aware of things. There's also mentorship cohorts, so that's also something that's really good. So you can be part of a mentorship cohort, and then the other thing is start using the software. Okay. If you start using it, you're going to find a bug. If you find a bug, report the bug. And ta-da, you have been a contributor.
Nice.
If you can, patch the bug. If you can, go to either, and this is the thing, if you want to do editor bugs, go to GitHub. If you want to do different areas and different components of core, you go to their component, and you'll find that on the make site as well.
Okay.
And go to their track. It is track, but the way that the track for core is now done, it's pretty friendly for track. I still have quite a soft spot for track. I'm a weird, broken human being. I do quite like Git as well, GitHub. And you can find that area, and there's things called good first bugs, and just find one, own it, and just work on it. And you can work on your own yourself. And as a developer, that's really, really powerful, I think. But work initially in an area that is either your comfort zone or something you want to learn. And I think that that's the interesting thing. If you're going to be doing this, if you're a sponsored contributor, and we can talk about that separately, then you're going to be sponsored to contribute in a certain area, or it's going to be like figuring out, and you're going to be like, there's going to be caveats to that, right? If you're doing it yourself, it's got to have some kind of reward for you somehow. You're not going to just turn up. So it's either you're doing it to do your own sponsorship, but probably what you're doing is your own growth somehow. And that's probably you're either looking to grow on your knowledge that you already have. So if it's your area's themes, you probably want to contribute in the new default theme that's coming out. So you would want to come along to default theme meetings. You'd want to jump onto the repo for that, and you'd want to make some patterns, and you'd want to, if you don't know how to do block themes, you use it as an opportunity to make block themes and learn block themes. So it's all these kind of things that you could use it as an opportunity to learn. And I think that's the important thing that we sometimes don't think about contribution. And I didn't know what I know today at all. And I've learned it all being a contributor. So that's because for a good part of the past few years, I've been a paid contributor. I'm not now, but for a good part of it, I've been a full-time contributor. And therefore, for those years, every single thing I was learning was because I was a full-time contributor.
Excellent.
And that's the thing. And now, for me, the way that I see it, for my contributions, they're to forward my knowledge. Unless it's a particular area that I'm like, oh, this area I know that this needs to forward the project in, or I have a passion in those areas. So I think that that's really important. Yeah,
absolutely. So that, we're talking about developer-focused contributors there. There's also a huge swath of contributors or people who want to contribute who just, they don't know code, they're not comfortable with code. And there's a ton of teams for them to participate in there. And when I talk to new people about getting involved, it's usually they run into just the problem of choice, right? There's so many choices. There's so many places to get started. For people who aren't able to make it to a physical camp and go to a contributor day and roam around different tables, which is something I recommend people do, is hey, sit at one table for a bit, get to know people, move around. But if somebody's not able to make it to an event and they're not a developer, what are some tips you have for them as far as who to reach out to, or how to find something they're passionate about?
I would say the same thing is start with testing. even if you're not a developer, you can still test something. Testing is like the best team, I would say. Testing or docs. The problem I have in recommending docs is the first one, is I sometimes think that that presumes that you're really into like documentation and words as well, which you absolutely might be, and that could be super cool for you. But testing feels like the team that anyone could just start. Like you just start using it and you probably can find a bug.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but you probably can. So testing it, and you can test different areas. You can even test the docs, which is kind of useful. But that would be the thing, and then reporting things. You're still going to probably sign up for a WordPress account, and you're still going to, but I would say the same advice applies what I just gave for developers. It's pretty standard advice. Think about, is there an area that you want to go? And so you probably work in a certain area. You're still coming to contribute for a reason. And that reason could be, I am a writer who now wants to expand into technical documentation, or I am a marketer who also wants to do some front-end development, or I am a marketer who also wants to do some design. Though that means that you can go in a specific contribution area, and not that you're going to suddenly get a job from there. Do not have that motivation, because it's not necessarily going to happen. It will be that you can get more skills. You actually can use the things that you learn as projects, like portfolio work. You could say, hey, look, I did this, because you did it.
Sure.
If you worked on it, but it's more about learning those skills. So if you work, if you know, you can learn how to make a block theme if theming is suddenly something you want to get into. So that. As for navigating the site is a lot better, but if you go to makewordpress.org, there's a new to contribution at the top, and you can like find out where your area should be.
Okay.
And that's really useful to just start doing that. But think about where you want to go. I'm a product person, so I'm always like, where do you want to go in the next year or the next quarter? Take your contribution journey like that. Literally, like think of your contribution roadmap and where do you want to go. Every year, I don't know if other contributors do this, maybe I'm weird, but I think about, okay, what is my personal contribution roadmap this year? What do I want to achieve? Am I going to be quite active personally this year? Am I going to be quite inactive personally this year? How am I going to do it? Where am I going to do experimentations? Where am I going to do focus work? Sometimes your plans don't work out how you want them, but sometimes they do work out how you want them. And just to kind of think about that, like your journey and how do you want to do it? Because you're motivated to contribute, so to keep on contributing. I've seen too many people just turn up with that energy of like, I want to contribute.
Yeah.
So where do you want to contribute? And they're like, but if you get to sit down for a minute and you think about why do you want to contribute, and where are you trying to grow to with that contribution, or just what's the energy that you're coming with, what's the motivation that you have, then the next step's pretty clear for you.
No, excellent. I'm just making some quick notes here on the new contributor guide. I've used it a few times, and it's very helpful, right, for just kind of helping you put in like what you're interested in, and then making suggestions.
Yeah.
And then it seems like, joining the Slack workspace and subscribing to those team channels, and
subscribing to the Make blogs is also really, really helpful, because you can even do folders for those, because then you just find out what's happening in those areas. And sometimes it'd be like calls for proposals, or calls for contributors, or calls for like joining releases. As you kind of like feel more comfortable, it'd be like the release lead, calls for release leads, or calls for people to join in, and all those kind of different things. Or when the new default theme came out, it was posted, and it was like the weekly meetings for that. And if you're like really keen on the new default theme, you could start following along that and just join in that as well. Yeah.
Awesome. We've mentioned there a little bit about paid contributors and not paid contributors, and I think that's an interesting discussion to have, because it's an open source project, which means it's all volunteers for the most part. And then there's paid volunteers, basically, and then there's also sponsored volunteers who might either work at a company or just be sponsored by that company. Can you talk a little bit about your experience of being both a paid and a non-paid contributor, and kind of how that journey has looked for you.
Yeah, I think it's important to also say that payment comes in different formats. Payment can sometimes be that you are learning something, but also sponsorship is you can be also part-time, full-time. I have been in situations where I've been a full-time sponsored contributor. I've been in situations where I've been a part-time sponsored contributor. I've also been in times when I've done my own Five for the Future. That's currently what I'm moving into now from September, where I will be everything that I do personally. I'm going to be because that's what I stand by. It will be my own Five for the Future. So that's going to be my approach, and I'll then be looking at kind of how do I take it from there. So you're asking like what was the difference in how does that approach take?
Well, I guess, what are some of the different ways that it can happen, and how does somebody get to the point where it makes sense for somebody to maybe sponsor them?
Yeah, so I think the easiest option with that is that someone will answer a job advert and looking for contributors. Don't quite often see that.
Sure.
The other option is someone will have a proposal for specific types of work that needs doing, and then they will go and they will look for sponsors of that work. Another option is that someone will go on GitHub sponsors, and they will look that way. I have seen lots of different varieties of different ways that people get work. Quite a lot of people get it through companies. So you'll see a number of companies. If you look at Five for the Future, a number of companies are doing that through Five for the Future. So if you are, as a person, you're like, you know what, I really want this to be part of my work. A really good idea is when you're thinking about what company to go for, look at the companies who are doing Five for the Future and go to one of those. That's actually one of my advices. Not that saying those companies are better than anyone else, but if contribution is part of like one of your goals in life, then looking at those companies is really, really important. So that's like part of how those people will get there as well.
Sure. For let's say there's a company and an organization who's looking to sponsor the project, what's some advice you have for them, for looking for contributors, and then for evaluating one contributor over another, as far as what are some things to think about if you're going to sponsor a contributor?
So this is always interesting with a company. I guess I'll start at the beginning. So the path generally is, hey, we know that this is really, really good to do Five for the Future. How do we do for Five for the Future? And then quite a lot of the times the conversation ends like that, because don't know how to do Five for the Future, don't know how to do anything. The conversation needs to be, is there I always try and bring it back to projects, because I think it's kind of good to look at that. So could your Five for the Future be a project that you focus on that moves forward either the work that you're doing? So if you're an agency, could it be extensibility that you focus on, because it's something that you've felt internally and you don't necessarily have a solution, but it's something that you're going to hit, is extensibility in the editor? Or is it something that not gains visibility, because that's kind of a weird motivation, like not such a good motivation, but is it something that's just a hitch in the project that just needs to move on? And that if you don't do it, it's going to be just harder for the project to get done. So maybe that's something, the data liberation, one of the import export, or because that project, it's just one of the checklists of things to do this year, and it's just not got done in the project, and you could help with that. From the who, I always encourage people looking for sponsorship to come up with proposals for work. I go back to the roadmap. Like, think about what you want to achieve in the year, and think about what of that does need to be sponsored and what doesn't need to be. If you're not thinking that way, then probably finding sponsorship is not the best route, and probably going to a company that takes on full-time contributors is a good route. There are companies that do that, and if that's the path you want to do. For someone like me, at the moment in my life, I like combining creating and contributing, if that makes sense. So I like to make products, but I also like to contribute. So it's a 50-50. and full-time contributors generally they can do making 100% because they're making for WordPress, but they're not necessarily going to get the outside perspective, and that's something for you to consider as a contributor as well. As the company, what you have to consider is who keeps your lights on. And this is kind of like the interesting balance. So say I'm going to give an example. There's so much we can talk about here, but it was a small agency and 2 people work on all your projects. Those 2 people, to then those people do contribution is really difficult. But if one of those people could be trained through contribution and push forward their skills because they didn't know those particular skills in contribution, and then you could get better projects, that could be really good. What I'm saying is these are all conversations to start having and planning. And I've had these with agencies, and I've had these with other people. Just think about what do you want to get out of Five for the Future? And all too often we want Five for the Future. Awesome. But what do you want to achieve out of Five for the Future? What is the goal? And who are you doing it? Just hiring a name because they got call. I have call commit. Great. Don't just hire me because I have call commit. There's quite a lot of people who have call commit. Don't just hire someone who has that. Hire because my core commit and me as a core committer gets you forward. Hire because Bob or Mary or whatever gets you forward, or Fred, right?
Sure.
And then combine how those projects have. And I think that's a really interesting thing. So maybe this project works now, and then changing the sponsorship to these people because that project works. That's a really complicated answer back to you, because I think it is.
Yeah.
It's like it's a roadmap, right? It should not be like I just want the page and I want it super simple, or at least for me, I don't think it should be that way. I think it should be a roadmap decision, because then you're doing it properly and you're doing it for longevity. And when you do it for longevity and you do it properly, it's a business decision, and then it becomes part of your business that you do Five for the Future.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a great answer, and I think it helps dig into the complexity that you should be considering when you want, if you're a company who wants to sponsor, or if you're someone who wants to be a contributor. Yeah. You need to make it more than just about hey, I'm contributing and now I get a badge, and it's not going to last, is what I'm understanding.
Badges are lovely and amazing, but unless I'm mistaken, they don't put food on table.
I haven't seen anything along those lines, but I think what you're saying is you need to have a deeper connection than just being part of the community. And if you're a business that builds plugins, then getting involved with the plugin team might make a lot of sense, because now you'll understand that process. You might improve the process.
But an interesting bit there is also look at the amount of people. It might make sense, but how many people are involved in that? It might actually make more sense for you to be thinking about, we're plugin team, but you know what's really bad for us at the moment? Onboarding experience. You know what's? Okay. Let's get involved in that onboarding ticket. There's like a mass onboarding ticket, right? Or you know what's really bad for us? I always go back to it. It's like my pet project, extensibility. Or you know what's really bad for us? Data views. Okay. You know what's really bad for us? Like we had 5 years ago themes, and we haven't been able to do themes because we felt we couldn't the sustainability of them. We just couldn't keep up with the tech stack. And then we just could. It was a nightmare. But with this block themes, it could work. So actually, you then pivoting to do 2025 and learning about block themes could be a new avenue of business. So that's the kind of business decisions and those kind of conversations I think are really important, because thinking about that narrow decision of where you are now and just plug in with you. In the past, I think we've oversaturated certain areas just because it's been, and we've seen this, there are areas of our project that would be incredible to have people in, and we often rely on one or two companies to just keep those going, and that's not useful. Actually, product companies like builders, plugin makers, theme makers, having those in those areas are really powerful and incredible. So I always kind of encourage product makers, where do you want to go, and where have you been that's not been successful from a business perspective, and could those be the areas that you want to contribute in?
Excellent. Before we jump further ahead, are there any parts of the project right now that you would highlight as, hey, more people need to get involved here?
Sensibility. Yeah, sensibility is one. That's having people, but also like finding out anytime a new thing is released, finding out where things need to be connected. Data views is huge. Like there's huge. The new it's not new, but the design system that's coming in, the admin refresh, that is
Okay.
it is actually a design system, and being involved as that happens, but that's so big. But thinking about like how that involved, and that is so open to designers, product makers, product people. It really is. And also anyone who's passionate about design systems could get involved in that. It's the theme 2025. It's a real hot topic, but that's there. And the tools around themes. So think about like the data, how are we looking at the importers and exporters? How are we looking at, people are looking at like from Figma, from different editors, all these kind of things. The easier it is to make things, the easier it is for people to make things that we can start using to grow the economy of WordPress as well. So really thinking about that. And then how create block theme plugin, how is that for theme JSON, all those kind of things. So the tooling as well is really important, like the tools around. And something that makers know really well how to do is tooling.
Absolutely. All right, that's very insightful. Jumping onto some hot button topics, of course, the editor is constantly something that's talked about. There's people that love it, there's people that maybe don't love it, and have harsher words perhaps, but so we're looking at just over 5 years ago, or 8 years now. What is it? 2015 was when they announced
the longer one.
Yeah. So, you were with the project before that happened, I'm assuming, and the big statement that Matt made was learn JavaScript deeply, and that scared a lot of people. But as an insider in the community, what has been your take about the Gutenberg editor and some of the different politics maybe that are going around it, but more importantly, where you see it taking the project?
Gutenberg was curious for me because I've been design lead for phase one, but also I do come from PHP, so my JavaScript deeply was jQuery very lightly and generally running away quite scared. that was my experience. But I learned stuff. Something actually that I learned, I'll kind of get into the experience, but because you said it, the actual whole process ignited in me, and this is a very personal thing probably, was the kind of experimenting, tinkering, hybrid nature that I have. And that was something I came to themes from, and that's something that I think we forgot in WordPress for a while. We did get into that position where development and design kind of went like this. And yes, we did have a design and develop leads, and we had those titles, but actually that project was the most combined we were in a long time. We were getting very fractured in the way that people were. We continue to be a lot more product centered. I say product, not design, because I think when we use the word only design, we kind of do away with the fact that it's deep experience. And we're really focused on some of the interactions. I mean, the amount of time that was spent during that project on shaving off seconds in like just interactions in the editor, or the other thing to think about is version 1 was so simple. There's always that like ridiculous graphic of the skateboard. Like people want the car, but then they get the skateboard. They did get the skateboard for the first thing, right? But you cannot refactor and redo everything and rebuild whatever boats we're doing, and then expect it to be like that. Like, I think expectations is one of the things. Over time we have learned about setting expectations. We've learned about so much as a community in a project. We've learned how to do interviews. We've all learned how to do podcasts. We've all learned how to do different information resources. We've all grown how many years? All got different dogs, cats, locations that we live, different growth stories.
Sure.
And I think one of the biggest things I've learned is really setting expectations of the end product. And I think that's something key. When you say something's going to be a certain way, there's that parable of everyone having a different vision of the elephant, and not thinking it's an elephant. Someone thinks it's like a leg. That kind of was what happened with the editor, but everyone who was working on it kind of knew it wasn't going to solve everything. It was a marathon that we're still on a great big path. For me, I deeply appreciate the simplicity of the start. I love when I see a post by Riyadh when he's focusing in on performance, or when I see the ability to remove things out of the interface. I love the site editor coming together now, and so the block editor where you create the content, and site editor. I love that I can create themes like Dreamweaver in the site editor, because I'm old and I'm a nerd, and the fact that I can now in WordPress make things like Dreamweaver delights me on so many happy levels. But I think it is really, really important to not dismiss anyone if they had any feelings. My hope is that people come back to the project, and I think that we have definitely seen that. And also the other thing that I think it's really important to do is think that it can be a foundation, and I don't think that message got over at the time, and it was particularly towards like the end of the time that I was working on it. It was something we were really trying to get out, was this is just the start of where you can then have a plugin that extends, or you can then have a builder that you use on top. I personally think that's really healthy. I think if core is like the starting point, and then like you can choose your own adventure with your theme, or choose your own adventure with what you turn on and off, I think that's good. I just think the default should be pretty solid. I just think it's how heavy that default is where the like balance is going to be decided. So yeah. It's just it's a growth thing, like, and it's going to ebb, and so sometimes it's going to be heavier, sometimes it's going to be lighter. It's going to be like this. Yeah. Sure.
I think when we were talking before the show, one of the topics that kind of came up as I brought up, open source versus closed source software and participation, and like with Microsoft, there's no chance you're going to be able to, you can submit a bug ticket, but you're not going to be able to work on the bug ticket. And like you had mentioned is, once you're let go from Microsoft, you're not able to work on that project really anymore, at least at the level that maybe you were when you worked there. And so I think that's something I'm always trying to remind people of is, hey, this is an open source project, right? It's based on the people that are participating in it. And we've got a few minutes left here, and I've appreciated all of your time, but I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts about why people should get excited about open source still. And I think we take it for granted now in 2024. It's like, open source is all taken care of, but no, it's something that we have to maintain.
I'm going to answer just a little bit before I get onto that, what you said, build on that a little bit. And one of the things is, I no longer am a full-time contributor. I worked at Automatic, and I had an amazing time working on the editor. I'm still a core committer, and I deeply value that. I have a pride in that, and I still want to do things like that, and I still want to come to the project. I've gone away and I've come back, and I've worked in different areas, and I've chosen to work on different parts of the project, and that's open source to me. I am so different to who I started out. I think that's the thing. Open source can grow with you as a person, and open source can grow with, I'm a weird hippie that lives in the countryside and makes art in my spare time, but really it can grow with, I think, the people that create it. I kind of use the term people source, and that's really true, but it grows with the technology as well. And I think that's the thing that we often don't think about. We kind of like focus on the fluffy people side and all the hippie and all whatever, but we don't focus on the fact of how adaptable and robust actually open source is to technology and the environment. If like the world isn't always like fluffy puppies and unicorns and fancy nice things, but open source has survived and is pretty adaptable and pretty good at sustaining because of its quite small footprint, and because of its pretty like way of just making do and amend, which is going back to our original conversation of like the weird computers I was building.
Sure.
And I think the skills that we learn in this community and the skills that we learn within open source are adaptable in life. I definitely have, like, if there's a way that you live your life open source, I probably have ended up living my life open source as much as, you know, someone can. But open source also for me comes from the art community. A lot of artists live collaboratively and think about collectives. That's really, for me, that's why it was quite natural to do. And we talk about like the threat of AI and we talk about this. For me, it's exciting how open source embraces it, and to see open source embracing some of this to start off with. If you want to learn about some of the newer technologies and you want to push them to their limit, but in a space that is something you could then turn into a job, pretty much you can do that in open source. And if you want to be able to tinker, if you want to be able to fall down and show stuff pretty low factor and get some support and get lots of opportunities, you can kind of do that in open source. And I've seen so many people be able to make incredible careers. That's also open source. I've seen people second, third careers. I've seen people like me who's pretty much most of their career been in open source. So yeah, it's definitely alive and adaptable, and every single person has a different path. And I don't also think that you have to be open source fully, or you can be you can just choose how much you use as well, which is really, really important.
Absolutely. No, I think those are great points. And it's just a reminder to people of like, you know, it's not set in stone that open source is going to be the way of the future unless enough people participate in it and help to build, you know, whether it's the WordPress project, whether it's PHP, whether it's Linux, all of these things require people with passion to
Projects die because people don't do a push, don't do a commit. And projects, I've seen many open source projects die because a maintainer just burnt out, but contributor burnout, it's a real thing. And if you don't support contributors, if you really, really like a project, support that contributor. If you really, really like a core committer or someone that's working on something, support that person. We have ways to do that. And if we are not doing that, then those people, they're not going to be around. They're going to be in awesome spaces doing awesome things because awesome people are supported eventually, I do believe, because the universe is great. But they're not going to be in your space doing the thing that really, really matters for you. So if you can, supporting them, that's just the thing that I think is really awesome to do as well.
Excellent. Tammy, we're at 58 minutes here, so I want to wrap this up and give you your day back.
Thank you.
Where can people find you if they want to connect with you, if they want to talk with you? Where are the places that you're online?
Yeah, you can find me at my site, TammieLister.com, and then you can find me at all the other places from there. And also on X at Karma Toast. Okay,
excellent. And we'll have links to everything for people to find you there as well. Tammy, I really appreciate your time. I want to have you back on, and maybe we'll do like a demo or we'll do a deep dive or something like that. But I really appreciate you and all of your contribution to the project and your time with me today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See you, everybody.